Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to the 112th Learn with Lorna, looking at the John Macleod collection held at the Highland Archive Centre. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer at the Highland Archive Service. The Highland Archive Service has 4 centres across the Highlands that look after the historic documents of the Highlands of Scotland. We have the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick, Skye and Lochailsh Archive Centre in Portree, and Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. There's a link to be able to do so in the text of this film, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. Thank you, as always, to those of you who have donated already. We very much appreciate it. So welcome to the 112th Learn with Lorna, the penultimate in this long run of talks, which will be taking a break over the summer months. So I'll finish at the end of May, take a 3-month break. I say that I won't take a 3-month break. I'll be flat out doing other things with groups and tours and so on. But taking a break from Learn with Lorna over the summer, returning on the 1st of September. So I hope you can join me when we are back on the 1st of September. I've advertised that first episode back already, so please have a look for it. Mark yourself as attending or interested so that you remember to join me, because I'm aware that 3 months is a big gap away. So I hope that I'm not on my own when we come back in September. Now, this week's episode is pre-recorded because if you follow our Highland Archive Centre Facebook page, you'll be well aware that I'm tied up this week with Melbourne Academy pupils. So I have 200 secondary school pupils in this week, looking at all sorts of documents and creating pieces of either creative or factual writing on the back of their visits. So a busy week, but always one of the best weeks of the year to do with that school. So hence this one is pre-recorded. Now, so far in this month's theme, we have looked at different churches, different denominations, the stories that come from those denominations, and extracts from church minutes, accounts, and so on. Next week, I'm going to be looking at something a little less tangible, a little less structured and formal, by talking about spirituality, faith, belief, superstition, and so on. But this week, looking at the story of one man, John Macleod, Professor Reverend John Macleod, through the Principal Emeritus John Macleod collection of personal papers, which are held at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. This collection is about seven boxes of around 3,000 letters and other items, dating from 1888 through to 2012, and it's deposited collection D1536. So quite a recent collection in terms of collections that have come to us. So who was John Macleod? Why was he important, and why do we have his papers? Well, he was born on the 25th of March 1872 at Londonderry House in Fort William, later moving on actually to a house in the town next door to the governor's house, in of course what was famously a garrison town. His father was Alexander Newton Fraser Macleod, who worked in the excise industry for the Inland Revenue. And his mother was Isabella McMaster, and she was the daughter of an SSPCK teacher in Stornoway, so SSPCK, Society for Propagating Christian Knowledge, in Stornoway, and his name was John McMaster. But her family, so John Macleod's mother's family, were from Lochaber, so Kilmally. And some of the McMasters, John's cousins and so on, had gone to Australia, and there's information about them in the collections as well. The family was one of those which adhered to the Free Church following the 1843 disruption. So it's likely that John's parents might have remembered the disruption. They would have been about 7 and 9 at the time that it happened. So when we spoke about that huge rift between the Church of Scotland and the creation of the Free Church, that's something that John's parents may well have had a vague memory of, being children at the time. And so by the time John was born, in 1872, the Free Church was nearly 30 years old. John grew up in Fort William and attended Fort William Public School until he was about 13. Both his parents were Gaelic speakers, but they didn't speak Gaelic at home very often. One of the papers describes it as not the language of the home, which is interesting because sometimes those languages are the language of the home as opposed to of the workplace, so or historically so. But it's noted that it wasn't the language of the home, even though both his parents spoke Gaelic. One of the items in this collection is a manuscript entitled A Boyhood in the Garrison. And of course, anyone in Fort William will know that the Gaelic name for Fort William is Angarrishin, which is the garrison, which, as you can see in the title, Fort. So he wrote some memoirs called A Boyhood in the Garrison. And he wrote them obviously in later life, looking back. And here's an extract from those notes. He's written them in April 1936. My memory goes back to early days in Fort William, where I was born on the 25th day of March 1872. The house where my parents then lived was known as Lundivra House. It was the old townhouse of the Lundivra family, who were cadets of the Lochiel family, so a branch of the Lochiels. The house became a ruin a few years ago and was pulled down. It stood on the south side of the high street, almost opposite what was then and may still be known as the Ben Nevis Hotel, the lessee of which, in my boyhood, was Alexander Boyd. The house of my birth was first to the west of the present post office, and at its west side a lane led up to a court behind which two families of McPhees lived. One of them represented the decayed fortunes of what used to be the chief family of the McPhees of Glendessery. In that glen, which has only a family or two now, there used to be 23 families of McPhees. The son of this family was at school with me. Duncan was his name. He's dead a number of years ago now. His trade was that of tailor. As I left Fort William when we were but boys, I have no trace of his family, if he had one. So you get a sense there of him looking back, remembering places in the town, people in the town, things that have changed. He also remembered certain very vivid moments. So that's a kind of general overview of the town, some of the people. But there are also certain very vivid memories of specific occasions, such as this. On one occasion, I remember the tides getting into the fort. It was the night of November the 23rd, 1882. There was the greatest gale that I have ever known, and as it swept up from the southwest, it heaped the waters of Loch Linnhe upwards. The water was about a foot deep on our ground floor, and I remember how my father carried us on his back upstairs. We had a kind neighbour who had left the governor's house some time before. I happened to say when calling on her a little after the storm that it was one I should never forget. She told me I should forget it. It is now over 50 years since, and I've not forgotten it yet. There were 3 vessels beached that night above the high water mark, and 1 puffer was sunk at Fort William. The only other storm of those early days that I remember was that in the end of December 1879. That was the night when the Tay Bridge fell, with a train and its passengers, and not one of the company was saved. We were as children at the Sabbath school when the wind arose. My father came to take us home, to shut the slates and the chimney cans that were coming down on the high street. And he took us round the back of the town by the Fassifern Road, so in order to avoid everything that was the debris that was falling. I still have the memory of what the rain was like on that night. In those years also, about the end of the 1870s and the beginning of the 80s, we had 2 or 3 very severe winters with long frost and deep snow and thick ice. Those hoary winters of early life set for me the standard by which I measure winters, and gave me an idea of what true winter weather should be like. And as he said in that memoir, which, as I say, was written in the 1930s, he left Fort William as a boy around the age of 13. He went from Fort William to Aberdeen, where he finished school. He was Dux of Aberdeen Grammar School in 1887, and then went on to study classics at Aberdeen University, where he was prizeman in Greek. His mother died in 1889 and didn't live to see this academic success and the subsequent success that her son was to have. Here's something extraordinary. John Macleod graduated in 1891 at the age apparently of 18 with a first-class honours degree. He was prizeman in Greek, he won the Seafield Gold Medal, the Black Prize in Latin, the Simpson Greek Prize, the Jenkins Prize in Classical Philology, and was a joint winner of the Fullerton Scholarship which was open to students of all Scottish universities to give them a scholarship to attend Oxford or Cambridge. And all of that by the age of 18, which I just think is completely extraordinary. A contemporary wrote to him in a letter in our collection, "I need hardly congratulate you on your success. You know, of course, how glad I am about it, and your labours have not been in vain. Seeing that your Fullerton work was purely an addendum to your real work, you may well congratulate yourself. But you will not, I'm sure, for you would not spoil by prosperity." And that's interesting as well. There's an awareness there of you are clearly very intelligent, very capable, but two things. One, you're never going to congratulate yourself because you don't want to be spoiled by that. But second, that all of this academia is an addendum to your real work. And this was to be a very profound observation, because John didn't follow that path of classics to Oxford or Cambridge, choosing instead to go into the ministry of the Free Presbyterian Church, his real work that friend mentioned. He did a year's divinity study at New College in Edinburgh before going on to work at the Nicholson Institute in Stornoway, teaching classics for 2 years with the aim of being in the Western Isles to improve his Gaelic. In 1874, he returned to divinity and undertook more training with the Belfast Theological College of the Irish Presbyterian Church, which was associated with the Free Presbyterians. In 1897, John Macleod was ordained in Ullapool, where he was to serve as Free Presbyterian, the minister of the Free Presbyterian Church and clerk to the synod for the next 4 years. So you can see him moving up the chain, following the direction of the career he wants to take. And you can imagine how useful his classics training in Greek and other languages would have been for this. I was interested to come across a letter in this collection which suggested that John considered serving in another way too. And this letter says, it's written from a gentleman in Glasgow, John Stewart, and it says, "My dear John, since I had the pleasure of seeing you last Saturday, I have thought a great deal about the possibility of you becoming a missionary to China." He goes, particularly as the Lord seems to have laid this matter on your heart for a number of years. So obviously, while he was at university, while he was training, there was something in his mind saying that perhaps he should become a missionary. He says, "A man of your education and advantages the Lord has much need of in China." And he's saying there's certainly a place for people like you. There's a use for people like you. You are well aware that there are no pecuniary advantages in connection with the China missions. So, it's not going to earn you any money, but the Lord has always abundantly supplied all our wants. The letter goes on to say, basically, here's some more information about it, have a think about it, and pray about it, and we'll be in touch and discuss it further. And as I say, I just found that as an aside because I know that's not what he went on to do, but it does reflect a love of obviously conveying the gospel, but also travel, which comes up through his life. So he didn't go to China as a missionary, he stayed. And in 1898, on the 26th of April, he married postal worker Margaret Macleod Matheson. The couple would go on to have 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, and out of those 5, 4 would become medical professionals. He left Ullapool in 1901, and John and the family moved to his new charge of the Free Presbyterian Church at Kames in the Kyles of Bute for another 4-year post. And it was funny, when I was on leave, whenever that was now, a month ago, I was passing through Kames. I was in that part of the world on holiday, and I hadn't written this at this point, so I didn't realise, but it's always nice when you then think, oh, in the same place where that person was. Now, in 1905, several pieces of legislation, and particularly around unification, meant that John Macleod moved from the Free Presbyterian to the Free Church. He started to lecture to students and became appointed was appointed Professor of Greek and New Testament Exegesis in Free Church College in Edinburgh. Now, if anyone else is unaware of what that word means, which I absolutely was, it means critical interpretation of the scriptures. So He's served his time as a minister in a couple of different parishes, had practical experience of working within congregations. He's moved over now from the Free Presbyterian Church to the Free Church, and then started to lecture to students, becoming Professor of Greek and New Testament critical interpretation in Edinburgh. So we start to see that move between the two things, between the pursuance of ministry, faith, sharing the gospel, but also that rooting in classical studies, academia, starting to cross. In 1907 saw an event which was to become very typical of his life. John Macleod went as part of a Free Church delegation to South Africa, and in his career he would travel extensively in South Africa, Canada, the US and elsewhere. And that's why I was saying I was particularly interested to see that reference to China, which he didn't follow, but obviously that desire to travel and to share never left him. Another example came in 1911 when John Macleod was part of the Free Church delegation to the Netherlands, a tour that would come 1 year after losing his father. 1913 brought a return to the Highlands because he was called to serve as the minister of the Free North Church in Inverness, which had at the time a congregation of 2,000, the largest congregation in the entire Free Church. And this would be his longest position. He would remain there for some 17 years, during which time he would also undertake a number of really prominent and significant roles within the Free Church and within the Highlands. So both from a religious point of view, but also just from a social point of view within the Highlands. An example of one of the things he did, which was not connected to his faith, but was connected to being a Highland resident and high-profile person, was that he served as chair of the Inverness Education Authority, which is one of the roles that is mentioned in his obituary, and this is an extract from his obituary. During his 17 years ministry in Inverness, Principal Macleod identified himself very closely with educational administration. He invariably headed the poll at the elections of the Old School Board and the Inverness County Education Authority, of which he was chairman from 1925 to 1930. It was while he was chairman of the Education Authority that his alma mater conferred on him the honorary degree of Doctor of Divinity in 1927. A Gaelic scholar of distinction, he contributed erudite papers to the Transactions of the Gaelic Society of Inverness, and he published numerous lectures, sermons and articles, one of his latter books being Scottish Theology in Relation to Church History Since the Reformation. Sounds like a nice light piece of reading. Published in 1943. Goes on to say, Principal Macleod was a preacher of extraordinary fluency, and the speed of his delivery was regarded by reporters as the fastest of any public man in the Highlands, while typesetters in newspaper and book publishing firms found a magnifying glass was necessary to read his scholarly but microscopic script. And I can wholeheartedly testify to that last point. His handwriting's absolutely tiny, and I'll share a picture after this. When this film has gone out, I'll share an image of some of his handwriting that we have to read, and the fact that we do genuinely have to use a microscope to have a look at it. So I mentioned there that he served as chairman of the Inverness County Education Authority. During this period, he also served as Inspector of Religious Instruction across the Highlands. And in 1920, he served as the moderator of the Free Church General Assembly. So the highest role at the General Assembly, the person in charge of overseeing the Assembly for the year, the moderator being elected every year. And in 1926, he undertook, again, a tour, something that just seems to have been very incredibly important to him, this time a tour of the Holy Land. That previous reading, that extract from his obituary, revealed that he was honoured with an honorary Doctorate of Divinity in 1927 by his old university, Aberdeen University. And there are numerous letters of congratulation in the collection. Old teachers, old lecturers, friends commenting on how overdue this was, how how much he had earned this honour and how proud everybody was of him. And interesting as well that that very first extract that I read to you saying, you won't spoil for prosperity. But obviously it mattered to him to keep these letters of congratulation. It was also in 1927 that John Macleod took on another role, as this extract shows. So, at Edinburgh, the 27th day of May, 1927 years, which day the General Assembly of the Free Church of Scotland being met and constituted. The Assembly proceeded to the appointment of a principal of the college to succeed the late Reverend J.D. McCulloch, D.D. The General Assembly hereby appoint the Reverend John Macleod, D.D., Free North Manse, Inverness, to be principal of the Free Church College of Edinburgh. Intimation having been made by telegram to the Reverend John Macleod, D.D., Free North Manse, Inverness, of his appointment to be principal of the Free Church College, Edinburgh, and Dr. Macleod having by telegram intimated his acceptance of the appointment, the Assembly hereby instruct the Free Presbytery of Edinburgh to take the requisite steps according to the laws of the Church for his induction as principal of the Free Church College, Edinburgh, and they ordain that his salary begin from this date. And it goes on to say this is an extraction from the records of the General Assembly of the Free Church of Scotland that has been sent to him and kept. So again, another hugely prominent role. So he's undertaken roles on education authority from a Highland point of view, lecturing, becoming a professor at Free Church College, serving a congregation, serving as the moderator of the Free Church General Assembly, and now being appointed principal of the Free Church College. And so that all happened in 1927, at the same time that he got his honorary doctorate from Aberdeen University. In 1930, John Macleod left Inverness after this long and significant period in charge of the Free North Church and that enormous congregation. And here's a press article that was written about his farewell from Inverness. Principal John Macleod's farewell. Preaching to a crowded congregation in the Free North Church on Sunday evening, the Reverend Principal Dr. John Macleod, all the titles, Reverend Principal Dr. John Macleod, who has been appointed to the chair of apologetics in the Free Church College, Edinburgh, spoke eloquently on the text, Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is no one else. Isaiah. I'm reading a chapter from Isaiah, but I'm looking at Roman numerals at high speed. At the close, Principal Macleod referred feelingly to his severance from the congregation of which he had been minister for over 17 years. He endeavoured faithfully to perform his duty, and he had to thank them all for their forbearance. Over 1,000 persons belonging to the congregation had passed away since his ministry began amongst them, and they were now practically a new congregation. He was sure that the very fine traditions of the Free North congregation would be carried on by his successor, and he had now to bid them all farewell. The sermon was listened to with intense interest, and it was evident that many felt the parting of one who was a faithful minister and an honoured member of the Free Church. It's lovely that, that feeling of the fact that the congregation are delighted that he's moving to something else that's good and positive, but that sense of sorrow at someone who's been along with them for such a long time leaving. So this is 1930, so it's 3 years after he's been appointed principal of the college. So why is he leaving? Well, the reason he's leaving is yet another high-profile and important role being given to him. This time he had become Professor of Apologetics and Pastoral Theology, a role that he was to retain until the early 1940s. And here's one of my favourite letters of congratulation about this. This is just absolutely, if you excuse the pun, absolutely classic, written from the Department of Greek and Classics, King's College, Old Aberdeen. My dear Macleod, it was a great pleasure hearing from you. My old students have been very good at this time, but I value most highly the the words of those who gave themselves heart and soul to Greek. I must confess I had hoped that you would have borne the name of Aberdeen high in classical study, but you had another and a stronger claim. I need not say that I have followed your career closely throughout, with warmest thanks. And it's from a Mr. Harrower, who was obviously one of his lecturers at university. But I love that wording of, I appreciate hearing from all my students, but mostly from those who gave themselves heart and soul to Greek. And then I must confess, I really wanted you to go into classical study and promote the name of Aberdeen University, but you've done something equally important. So we're in 1930. A serious blow was to strike John Macleod in 1932 when his wife, Margaret, died. And again, there are a huge number of letters in this collection that mark this point in his life and in his children's life. I said at the beginning that there are over 3,000 letters in this collection. Many of them are to do with his work, but also many to do with things like that, moments that have changed how his life felt and how his life ran. After his wife's death, John continued to travel, representing the Free Church in the USA and Canada on several more occasions before retiring in May 1942 due to suffering with Parkinson's disease. After marking his jubilee in the ministry in 1947, John Macleod died on the 11th of July 1948 in Edinburgh, where he was buried in Grange Cemetery. His legacy lives on in numerous ways, not least through the donation of 1,000 books that he gave to the library of the Westminster Seminary in Philadelphia, but also through all of those congregations that he interacted with, whether the short time in Argyll or in Ullapool, or the long time in Inverness, but also in the Free Church College, in the Free Church General Assembly, and so on. His legacy lives on in all of those places. This is an extract from his obituary. His old congregation in Inverness, by whom he was revered, will feel his passing deeply, for to his great gifts of scholarship he added lovable human qualities, among which could be numbered an extraordinary modesty, a humility which was exemplary, and a quiet but dignified sense of humour. It's a fascinating collection, and one which I have only dipped into here. There are a range of other things in there. There's some letters from someone who was famously accused of being a Nazi. There are some letters talking about changes in the Free Church structure. But in order to keep it to half an hour, I thought I'll do an overview of his career. And if anyone is interested in finding out more about this collection, which has not really yet been tapped as much as we think it could be, then please do get in touch or come in and have a look if you're able to do so. So a fascinating collection, which I hope you've enjoyed having a whistle-stop tour through. Thank you again for joining me. As I always say, please do leave your comments and I will pick them up after I've dealt with hundreds of teenagers. Next week, as I say, we'll be looking at spirituality in the last episode before we return in September. Thank you for joining me, and a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. And thank you, as always, to those of you who have already done so. It really does make a difference to us. And I'll look forward to speaking to you next week. Thank you.